Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, this is the introduction or part one of the review of, in great detail, the book and situation. The book is called Extreme Prejudice, the Presidio Satanic Abuse Scam by Michael Aquino, Colonel Michael Aquino. This is a very serious book and situation that needs to be gone through carefully in great detail. So I'm going to make a very long series on this, most likely, as long as I need to, and I'm going to try and keep it down to a bite size for each part. So this is part one, kind of the introduction. And we're going to cover absolutely everything here and go through it step by step. This connects into what could be an international ring of satanic groups and child molestation, what would you call them? Criminal activity. And this is pretty frightening what's going on, and there's an awful lot of information out there. And what that is, again, I'm going to go over a lot of salient points that people understand, because there isn't any facts anywhere. There's information which is people's opinions. And since there has never been, almost in any case that we talk about, these great conspiracies of child molestation cases, which seem to be everywhere and hugely documented, from people being Johnny Gosh, I think it was, who was actually tasered and taken off the street. He was a paper boy. This is quite frightening. And this seems to be a fairly common situation. There seems to be an organized group of criminals that appear to be connected with police agencies, intelligence agencies, that are using and abusing children by the millions around the world. And this is an area where people will pay for it, like anything to do with sex. This is the ultimate forbidden, and apparently it's a forbidden fruit that a lot of people like the taste of. Something I could quite never understand, the sexual attraction of children. But this is something that is pandemic, and if you listen to everybody, and I have, you will find some very shocking stories. And how many people disappear every year? All of this is very shocking. How many children disappear? These are tens and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people disappear constantly. So this is great. Where is everybody going? So there's been many investigations, and really nothing has come of it. And then we have people that have been linked one way or another, which is really totally unverifiable. And a lot of that gets into comic book investigation of this serial killer was linked with a group. And they're all linked with groups. They're all working together in this international conspiracy. Well, that kind of thing doesn't seem to hold much water in every individual case. Now, are there groups of people that are doing this? Well, there certainly is, and it's been verified that there are groups doing this. Some of them seem to, or maybe they use the name of being intelligence agencies, but we have a very sick society. And one of the problems, and the reason why everything in society doesn't work out, so it's not just this very perverted area. Well, religion is sick. Medicine is sick. Certainly, so-called law enforcement is sick. The military, everybody's sick because of one reason and one reason only: corruption. Nobody is happy with what they have. Everybody wants to have a gross amount of items, more than they really need, because this is how they're trying to fulfill themselves, because they are spiritually void. People are void. They want to fill in voids with drugs, sex, and money. And it never really works ultimately, even though it certainly is fun trying. So this is a very difficult situation that we get into. And I want to go through this because this is a very serious topic. Now, this is a perfect topic for someone who knows what they're talking about. And quite frankly, I'm the only person who is versed in satanic practices and been involved in, quote, occultism for 50 years now, covering all the areas. And, we're talking about alternative stuff. Metaphysics is really the better term for everything. But I had and have been following for over 35 years now, maybe up as many as 40, these satanic cults and what the Temple of Set has been up to because of my original contact through Roy Hollywood Tuckman. I think KPFK in Los Angeles had all sorts of recordings and information on at that time when I was listening to it in the early 80s. I'm trying to remember the time frame there, but he has an overnight show kind of similar to Art Bell, but much higher level thinking and presentation. And talked about all this, and I just happened to be listening to it where I was at that time running a small business. But I also ran into him because of the fact that at that particular time I was involved in runic magic and working with what are considered Norse or Odinist religious groups. Because after getting out of Christianity, moved into something that I felt more closer to, that had a more attitude of what this world is all about. And you want warrior gods, not sacrificing gods. So, that kind of bizarre reality that Christianity has taken on is quite strange. Of course, none of the Christians really follow any of that stuff. And they're just a bunch of egomaniacs down a track of destruction, trying to pat you on the back saying they care about you, but they really do nothing. They're very, very hateful. I've never known a Christian who wasn't filled with hate. So I'm in a very unique position to judge this material. And I've been a professional researcher for technically since I've been about 10 years old. I've been constantly doing research while other people were doing whatever. I was going to the library and looking through the many sections, particularly the government section, that had a lot of rare information, government publications that nobody really saw unless you were involved in that particular area. So I'm a professional researcher. I've researched many topics. I've written over 25, maybe 35 books now, 5 courses. I've been on numerous interview shows, the Art Bell, CNN, BBC, and in general, I'm constantly doing research. And of course, I have a degree in the occult sciences, and I also, I have a doctorate in the occult sciences. I have a doctorate in subtle energy physics, which is the study of all these energies and the application of those energies through processes called radionics in the common terminology. But it's really subtle energy physics applied through practical technologies. So I'm in a very unique position to know what this guy is kind of into, to know what Satanism is all about and the field in general. What's going on here? Who is this guy? What is he talking about? How does this come up? What is and I've read the Satanic Bible, and of course, Aquino has made his own version of it, which I will read as well. And that's another book review. I've already done a book review on his kind of autobiography, which it really isn't. It's a book on cars that he weaves in a bunch of almost ridiculous information, very eclectic information. He talks about cars, gives their history, but there's nothing personal there, as I said. He doesn't say how he loved this or how he loved driving and etc. So these are all the strange things you run into. And he threw in information about many other things. But it really wasn't any autobiography. Really didn't talk about his life at all, even though, again, you put the pieces together. That book has one of the few photographs of his actual father and has, I think, a paragraph on his father, if it's that many, 5 or 6 sentences. So he doesn't talk about his family, his life, or anything else. So we don't know where he's coming from other than the fact that, in generalities, and I don't want to get into that here. We want to get into this extreme. So the Presidio was one of several major child molestation cases that took place at military bases. And the problem is you can endlessly research this to a degree. But being a professional researcher and doing it for so long and listening to hundreds of people and listening to a subject matter where you listen to everything. I've listened to every single interview that has been posted anywhere I can find it. And I've done searches, particularly, obviously, YouTube. But there are other ones which had Michael Aquino, and you can get a lot of information right out of his mouth, meaning what his line for everything is, what his belief is, his side of the story. And, we have to get everybody's side of the story. The problem is when you go in, like this book title is, with basically extreme prejudice, you've already failed as a researcher. So what we're trying to do here is find the facts. This is not, and I'm going to approach this entire book, this is not about a Satanist molesting children. This is about molesting children, period. So when you throw in all that other stuff, that doesn't really mean anything. That's adding spices to an already spicy meat. Did it help it or did it hurt it? Well, it's your personal taste. And the problem is people out there are highly prejudiced. They know nothing about, quote, the occult in general. And Satanism is not occultism. It's not paganism. It's reverse Christianity. Pagans don't believe in Satan. Of course, they do believe, and Satan comes from the Judeo-Christian belief system. So that's all that Middle Eastern crotch stuff that has been plaguing this world forever. So what we need to look at here is what are the facts of this guy and how he is connected to all of this situation here. And what are the facts of it? Not the fact that he's a Satanist. I don't know what that really has anything to do with it in the bigger picture. What was going on there, and was he part of it? What were the reports? It's very difficult. I mean, Michael Aquino with Anton LaVey's daughter, I forget, Zena, I think it was. I'm not sure if that's it. But he was sitting next to her on a TV interview show, the Geraldo show. And ultimately it comes down that an awful lot of allegations, claims that people did things, and that there was this huge amount of satanic child abuse, particularly in, of all places, the little Manhattan Beach, California, which is a beach in near Los Angeles, a kind of a lower middle class beach town. It isn't a fancy place like Malibu. And this is where the McMartin case came from. And they spent years going over that. And it's quite fascinating information. And I think in the McMartin case, and I will go into that as well, because I'm going to go into all these cases and pretty much get the information out there from an unbiased, very advanced thinking, skilled, trained person in this metaphysical area. Which I'm the only one, because people don't have the background. They're not going to study that. If you're an investigator or a police officer, you're not going to study occultism other than reading a pamphlet. You're not going to know anything about Satanism except what you heard from other people. And this is what happens with a bunch of really bad people out there. And as I said, I haven't been able to find a single decent researcher, particularly in this area, period. They're just not out there. You listen to these people and they make complete and total wrong statements. So wrong that it's virtually laughable. But the problem is that even if that person is a person of value and has done research or whatever they're doing, well, when you make gross misstatements that you haven't checked out and that you don't bother to check with people that know something, and even further with many of these people, I have contacted them saying, hey, you're doing something wrong here. Talk to me and I'll give you information that'll help your investigations. They refuse to get back to me. So what's the problem there? What's going on there? But of course, there are many problems there to a big degree. And of course, I am blackballed in all of these industries because I talk truth. And apparently, these people who don't want to communicate to get facts and information, even though they claim they're seeking the truth, which I don't really think is the case. They're seeking ratings and money. Everything is, I don't want to spend too much time on anything. I just want to, this guy says he wrote a book. This guy says this. Yeah, we take it at face value. Well, that's really bad research. That's not research. The bottom line is we're trying to find the gnosis, the Christ consciousness, the truth of the matter. And that is important. We don't want to lynch somebody who's innocent. And of course, grabbing somebody who's innocent or going after the red herring while the actual criminals keep doing their own things is very counterproductive. And you really have to wonder, well, who are these people working for? Why do they continue to state horrible information? And when people have information, they refuse to seek them out, even when they're contacted. So there's something really strange going on there. But what does that say? It says that there's no proper researchers. They don't even bother to get it. Now, you can tell somebody something and say, well, I don't believe that. If that's your opinion, whatever. Well, that's fine, but they're not even getting that. They're not finding out. Of course, most people, watch my channel on YouTube, get a lot of information, and then use it for themselves. This happens all the time. They continue to do that without giving me credit, and they take it and run with it. So this goes on all the time. We see this, and I'll put up something like this, and another week or two, we'll find other people using it, whether that's technology, new radionic and other type information and tools. Well, all of this is copied and horribly. And they take all my information because I am the expert. So the bottom line is I am the expert on this planet in satanic cults. And in general, occultism as a bigger field because there's many aspects of it, as well as subtle energy physics and, of course, radionics. Nobody knows what I know. I've been doing this for over 50 years and directly involved in it, not just armchair. When it comes to all these things, I have been involved with it, talked to people, and so forth. So I'm in a unique position. Of course, that gives you a very unique and lucky that you can get information from somebody who knows what's going on instead of them getting hearsay. Now, one of the problems is when you talk about, in terms of prejudice, the minute someone is a Satanist, well, nobody really likes that, at least didn't. But most people are Satanists, whether they call themselves Christians or Muslims, etc. Well, they're really following this low-level crotch, root chakra reality of theirs, the basis level of things. And certainly there's nothing high level about any religion. Some try and take the higher plateau. Some try and say how great they are and moralistic they are, like the Tibetans and the Buddhists. And then they take 10-year-olds and they stick them in monasteries with 12, 13, 15-year-olds. And, of course, they're taken from their family at 10. Is that really a good thing to do? Well, I don't think it is. And I don't know why they have to be taken from their family. But one of the biggest problems you run into is when you start mixing young kids and teenagers, you have a recipe for horrible sexual problems. And this can be traumatizing or not. Aleister Crowley talked about this in the typical, I don't know if they call them public schools, which are private schools in the United States. Basically, you're getting a bunch of horny teenagers and putting a bunch of 10-year-olds in there. So there's constantly sexuality going on. And a lot of this can be very traumatizing. And I think it is. And I think that's one of the reasons why particularly England, Great Britain, the UK, has such a problem, or appears to be, as there are several other countries as well, have a huge homosexual conditioning there, or people go through stages. I think people go through stages in general because when it comes to all these things, you're generally horny at a very young age. And that means you usually have sexual experiences initially. And people don't talk about that. They're usually with friends, buddies, brothers, sisters, whatever it may be. This is how people tend to experiment because those are the people that are there. So this is all the kind of stuff people don't want to talk about. But I'm not going to look at this as a Satanist who has committed some sort of child molestation. I'm not stating that he did it either. Everybody wants to jump to conclusions. And these are the same idiot boobs that misreport everything else. And the minute somebody says something, they want to report that because that's a show for them. That's something that they can grab onto. That's something they can type into their website. So people conveniently do that without it. Now, the problem is, like everything in life, if you want to excel at it or you want to be empowered through it, you have to know the subject matter. So if you're going to talk about satanic cults, well, you're going to have to know a lot about it. And you're going to have to know, well, what do they do? What is that? Now, we have people that mix regular occultism, metaphysics, and you could say witchcraft, Wicca, etc., and they're blending it all together. It's just not the case. Most witchcraft is earth-based religions, and these earth-based religions are your herbist and other ones, and they've been demonized ever since Christianity came in and took over, basically with the sword, because nobody really wanted to convert. They just murdered lots of people. So they have nothing to do with that. And the whole idea is to put these people together is a big error, because they don't do any of the same practices. Now, whether someone calls themselves a wizard, a witch, or a sorcerer and is doing negative or evil practices or killing animals, well, sacrificing animals, well, that's their thing. But that's generally not what has been understood of what these areas are. And you need to know these areas. You need to know what all these areas are about to get proper information. None of them do. You can't read a little book. You have to talk to people. It's amazing how researchers, particularly Maury Terry with the Son of Sam, spent endless hours talking to corrupt cops and used a whole bunch of people to bring information to him that they knew nothing about it. Yet he really didn't talk to or references anybody from the satanic community or people involved in, quote, witchcraft. He didn't talk to any of these people. He gets bad information from bad people and then says, well, this is it. The kind of things that are stated about Michael Aquino and the Process Church being involved in so many things, unfortunately, the plain and simple fact is that nothing has ever been proved against them. And of course, even if we go out there and we look at things in a particular fashion because of the corrupt police, because it all really comes down to the corrupt police. They know what's going on everywhere. People are really misled if they don't understand that everything going in society and your particular town is well known. Every criminal, every activity is well known. Only very bizarre things are not known, but everybody knows that. I mean, even if there's husband and wife problems, everybody knows who in that town is the people that are causing that, or whether there's some sort of physical abuse. Everybody knows it because the cops have been called there before. So they have the name of the people. They know these are the people, and they're not surprised when they get calls from these. These are the troublemakers. These are the couples that fight. This is the guy who's... Everybody knows that. And that's just on a certain level because all towns are pretty small. The other things, they know who every single drug pusher is. They know who's on probation. They know what gangs are in that area. They know everything. Now, why do these even exist? Well, we run into all sorts of problems when we get into these areas, and this is all part of the bigger discussion, and you need to know it. I'm going to get into the facts of this book, but this is all the bigger picture that we need to understand. It's very, very critical because the information that we get is all skewed. It's all corrupted. There seems to be connections between wealthy groups. Everybody's heard of the recent Epstein situations where he was basically running this. These kind of cults, apparently, especially per some police officers like Detective James Rothman of the NYPD, who claims he saw hundreds and hundreds of kids that were being abused every day in the clubs of New York. And that this was quite common, and that people being kidnapped and so forth is very, very common. And the amount of people that disappear is very, and people don't know that. And yes, he's right in this area, but I've also had him state wrong information, and that concerns me. Because first of all, he's a professional investigator. That's all he's doing. Now, we all tend to quote things. I'm terrible with dates and names and certain things. I try and stay away from specifics unless it's really critical. And there's an awful lot of information to remember here. And to even to making something like this and writing it all down and going through a book is quite a process. But the bottom line is that if you want to be able to do anything well or even report on something, you need to know the subject matter. Other than that, you're relying on other people who are giving you their, quote, expert opinion, which almost is worthless except in a very big picture way. When you get into the very complicatedness of all these things, and you get into subcultures or people doing certain practices, you really need skilled people that know what they're talking about. And I've seen time and time again of people that don't understand anything. And when you tell them that you're reporting the wrong information, they're not interested in it. Why is that? So it means that all the reporting you get, all these investigators, guys that write books, are doing it all wrong, and they're doing it for a nefarious purpose. Maury Terry was a plain example of it. Here's a guy that really did nothing. He wrote one book. That's it. And the first half of the book was pretty good, talking about the intricacies of the son of Sam and what was going on and who was shot. Then in the next half of the book, he goes into his theories, which are totally and completely worthless. They don't really get into the issues, and they're just wrong statements. And they want to buy an easy solution. They also want to buy what's sexy because they want to sell more books. So, we get into always the problem. The big problem is corruption because we know what the facts are, or at least certain segments of this population do. There's files. Everything is secret. We can't know about UFOs. We can't know about this. We can't know about... they got secrets still from the Civil War. World War I, there are things that are still... Why? So when you live in a society that is constantly keeping secrets that have really no secret value, well, what happens is everything that you're given is looked at as false or misleading. And unfortunately, it's true because you've got all these different psyops going on around you constantly, manipulating your thoughts and pushing you in a particular direction. Well, this is horrendous. And it fits into people making money. It really came down to it, the son of Sam and Maury Terry, in his reporting, he was supposed to come out with all the facts. He didn't have any facts. He had nothing to come out with, and he was afraid to report whatever he knew. The bottom line, it comes down to the police know it, the police won't do it. Why won't the police do it? Well, there's this giant corruption again. There's connections to people apparently who are very wealthy and very well connected. And if you as a good cop go out there, well, you're told to retire like James Rothman was done. So he got too far there, and they just said, hey, that's enough. We're not going to put any more energy into this. And I believe he was then put on retirement because he was old enough, I guess, by then, or had the years in. So how are we going to find out any facts if the people that have the facts and have these used files refuse to release them because of their own corruption? The other thing is information just is destroyed. You got to remember that we lose massive amounts of information every day, even in the digital age. A lot of things aren't backed up. How much stuff have you lost in your life because you didn't back it up, or you had to back up and it didn't work right? Well, this happens all the time. But when you have physical files, which cost a lot of money to keep, and are physical in nature, meaning they can be affected, well, there seems to be endless fires, floods, and other things, and just a lot of throwing away of things because there's no more room. Well, that was 40 years ago. Do we need to keep it? Well, generally not. We have to be realistic. Do you need old files from 40 years ago? Are you going to really investigate those? Well, it may be nice, and everything should be digitalized and placed somewhere so that we can keep it and reference it if the need be. But this doesn't happen. A few people understand that, physical libraries throw out books all the time. If a book is not checked out and read often, it gets put in the book bin and sold to you for a few bucks. So it's not that that's a good book with excellent information, but since it isn't used, it's worthless. They get rid of it. And there's endless amounts of information that never get anywhere. Harvard has, I think, 5 million books in its library. 5 million books. And most of these are rare books that nobody ever knows about. So this is quite fascinating when you get involved in all these different areas to figure it out. So what is somebody telling you now? Well, first of all, you have to know your subject matter. So when someone says this was done and that done, well, you got to know that. Now, one of the handicaps, which is a big one for my research in this particular area, even though I'm looking at this from more of a direct child molestation case and not a satanic child molestation, because I don't see how that plays into the facts here. because it's been boiled down to a few individuals, and whether they were whatever reason they were doing it, we certainly have an awful lot of molestations, and even the FBI has said this. The fact is that, if somebody's going to be molested, most likely it's not going to be by a Satanist, because there just ain't that many of them. So the whole idea is that it really has nothing to do with Satanism, because this is one individual. We're not really talking about others per se, and that's the other thing, is that it's always Michael Aquino. Always Michael. Why? Because he's the well-known. He's been on TV. He's been everywhere. Yet not a single prosecution, all charges ever made against him were dropped, as was every other person in the Presidio. And we'll talk about that as well. And so where is the actual legal cases against these people if they're so strong? So why aren't they prosecuted? Why aren't they in prison? Even if the information is bogus and wrong. Oh, there's so many facts of it. There's so many this. People like to say that. People are like, oh, the kids had different venereal diseases and other things. Well, isn't that gross physical proof? Why is nobody in prison or even going to serious trials? So it gets very confusing about society and everything else. And oftentimes when you're accused of something, because of the complications, the cost, the destruction of your reputation, etc., the time it takes from your life, you buy people off. You just give them money and say, okay, fine, we'll settle with you out of court for this right now. You shut up and leave me alone. And if you have money, I hate to say it, but that's a good way to get rid of somebody who's going to drag you through court, and you're going to spend more money paying your lawyers. Well, you might as well, instead of paying $500,000 in legal fees, we'll pay that person $200,000 in money to go get lost. So it's a very complicated issue, and we're going to look at that. I'm going to go through everything, including the cover of the book, because there's information there as well. And we have to look at everything. And I have a fairly good background understanding of Aquino at this particular point. And we pieced together his life. I don't really need to know if he was happy in junior high and the exact relationships with his family, etc., because there just isn't information there. And let's say I was able to get somebody from the Temple of Set, their new people, Don Webb, who knew him well, to talk about Aquino, and get his in. Well, it's a very prejudiced viewpoint. Don Webb was the head of the Temple of Set for many years. He was very good close friends with Michael Aquino. What does that mean? So getting information from him directly is another very prejudiced source. So whatever someone says has little or no value. You got to take everything with a grain of salt. You then take those grains of salt, you put them all together, and then you see if you have a synergistic pile of value, or was it just junk? So this is all part of doing the investigation properly. So as I've mentioned here, this is the introduction, which I'll end right now. This is part one to let you know. So the bottom line is that I am completely and totally taking no sides on this. I'm seeking truth, and the fact is, and I don't care how weird this guy is. I don't care what he's done. I don't care whether people don't like him because he's a Satanist or whatever. Is he involved in this or not, and do we have proof of it? So the problem is that most things tend to lean in one direction, but I've been finding in my research lately that there's always around 5% of information that's very difficult to prove. It leaves a very dark spot on a giant white tablecloth. There always seems to be a little stain on there that's kind of annoying. And you never seem to be able to get that stain out of that tablecloth. You go back to that tablecloth every year, use it or whatever it is, your Thanksgiving tablecloth, and it's got a stain of gravy on it, and you've washed it and done everything to it, but there's always a residue there. It's never fully gone. And that's what I've been finding out with most of these cases. When we look at people like the organizations like the Process Church, the Temple of Set, and particularly Michael Aquino, basically there's little to nothing of proof against them, except gossip from haters, and it makes a sexy story. But ultimately, none of these people have been prosecuted. None of them have been brought to court and found guilty. But there's a little bit of residue there that you're still not 100% sure. And then of course, when you add in the politics of life, money, etc., things get pretty goofy and hard to prove. And we can't go around convicting people and lynching them without 100% positive proof. And I have trouble with all that. There's a lot of cases, in life in general, particularly rape cases. And this is a terrible thing to have happen to somebody. But the problem is, it's their word against the other ones. Why did you go into his hotel room? Why did you go to his house after the disco and drinks and dinner? What do you think he was going to do at his house? You're going to play checkers? So the whole idea is, there's a unwritten contract that goes on that if we're going to go back to my place, well, this means. But that's not how other people see it. They don't see it that way. And when they don't have a ring at the end of the night, or they're not the girlfriend to come back the next day, well, feelings turn from, wasn't this fun, to, you really abused me. So things are very difficult, and one person's word against another, as far as I'm concerned, is worthless. We need some sort of proof. We need some sort of physical evidence. And this is very difficult to do, but to say that someone raped you, and the extreme of these things is now people are in bed sleeping with somebody, and they claim that they were raped in bed there. Raped in bed. Isn't that consensual? If you're naked in the bed with someone else, well, that's why you're sleeping together. Are you sleeping together for what? What reason are you sleeping together for? Well, you're sleeping together because this is a sexual union. So these are things we have to be careful of. We have to be very direct here. The other thing is, how do we believe anybody? So this book is filled with statements that he claimed came from certain people, from the FBI, and investigators, police, etc. Is that correct? Is the information he published there? And he is a very good writer and a very good compiler. This is what he's done well and why he excelled in the military. He went to every school and passed. He was kept in the military in different positions because his ability to write well and to put together research. Now, this is something that particularly the Army never really had. The Army was always thought to be a bunch of idiots. The lowest level out there, basically, was actually the Army. So when you get a guy like this in there, they are able to move around and become officers, etc. But he became an officer through having a 4-year education, going through ROCT. And of course, that's the easy way to do it instead of going through boot camp and officer training school. So however all that works to the bigger point there. But the bottom line is that he is very good at putting things together. His book on the temple, on the Church of Satan, he's kept every letter he ever wrote, and he republishes it there, what he said or wrote to Anton LaVey, what he got back, their discussions. I mean, it's very thoroughly put together. You could also say about that it was very carefully contrived to get the opinion of what he wants to get. And a lot of times, he really, and I'll be doing more information on that, his book on the Church of Satan, which he claims he loved Anton LaVey, but he did nothing but trash him in that entire book, telling he was filthy. He did all that stuff to do with it, was very bad for a guy that he cared about. Secondly, he broke away and destroyed the Church of Satan and, of course, the leader, and he doesn't see that as a problem. He figures he was betrayed because Anton LaVey wanted to sell priesthoods, and probably that was not the smartest to do. There was things you can sell, but he decided to do that because he needed money. And it didn't seem like anybody else was coming through with money. As a matter of fact, they weren't, and Anton LaVey died basically in poverty and never really made much money, period. Again, here I diverse, but this is all part of being understanding the process of what's going on here. And of course, there's lots of bad reporting in this case. People have made all sorts of statements, and I have repeated them as well, thinking they came from authorities, but they actually didn't. These were bad reportings, people who were working against him. And of course, most of the people that accused Aquino of doing things were Christian ministers. Well, they're not a good source. They're headhunting. Secondly, the problem is that it was seen as a quick, straight route to a lot of money, millions. So it was very easy when these things started to move to jump in and blame Aquino and try and cash in. Oh, nobody would do that. Of course they would do that. That's the problem out there. So he writes something that says, well, here's the paper from the FBI. It could even be on their letterhead, etc. What does that mean in this day and age? I mean, ever since the invention of the copy machine, reproducing documents on somebody's letterhead takes a couple of minutes. It's even easier now with computers. So can we believe these are the actual reports of doing things? And are there some key documents that should be gotten directly if possible? But doing this is a huge full-time job. It takes a lot of time to do that. And most likely, that's not something I'm going to do unless it's such a key. So we're going to go through the paperwork and we're going to have to look at it to see, is this a valid? What has happened in the meantime? This is a long time ago. This whole, what they call the Satanic scare, was in the 80s and 90s. You're talking 30, 40 years ago. So all the information and all the eyewitness accounts are virtually useless. Michael Aquino is dead. He died a couple of years ago. His wife is like 86. Lilith, whatever her age is exactly, but she's in her 80s now. There are younger members of the Temple of Set, but they really weren't involved in it. One of them, of course, is Don Webb, and there's a few other people. There's someone running it now, but and all of these people knew Michael Aquino very well, particularly Don Webb. But what are they going to tell you about him? They're going to trash the Temple of Set? They're going to trash Aquino, the founder? Well, generally not. I mean, one thing you find with radical people is that unlike most of the communities out there that like to trash everybody, they kind of stick together. And Satanism has been forming as a group together for over 20 years now, working together. They used to argue with each other, and that is kind of minor now. They kind of all stick together. So how do we judge the information that's in these books, etc.? And of course, you can spend the time trying to get the same document, getting information about, trying to find if it's online in a neutral place. But, people write all sorts of things online. So we just don't know. I mean, people have written that Michael Aquino was technically a general in the NSA. Well, where did that come from? And where's the proof of that? And of course, this was secret. But, this is a guy who every badge he's ever gotten in life, every sticker he got out of a cereal box, he has listed as an accomplishment of his. That's what he's into. And he's fairly well excelled, becoming an Eagle Scout, and I think he rose to some level and whatever. Was a very high ranking, the number one, I think so everything he's done, he's been this excelling. And he's a very aggressive person, which he hides. He's very aggressive and very high level, always looking for the highest, best level of achievement, and generally does do that. So we have to look at that and what is good, what is not. All of that is something we have to. So as an introduction here, that should cover it. We're going to talk about the details of it. As I said, I'm going to go right into the cover. And what does the cover tell us about so many things? So hopefully this is clear to everyone. This is going to be very in-depth, and it's up to the interest of the person. But I think this is a good record for people seeking what is actually going on here instead of some little hour interview with somebody who thinks they know him or said they knew him or everything else. I mean, all the things that go there. But we also can't believe his people. We can't believe his enemies. We have to find somebody who is neutral, and that's me. So stay tuned for part 2.